In a weathered coastal diner, every morning follows the same pattern. Elora pours coffee with trembling hands, her smile practiced but empty. The locals look away when Rook grabs her wrist, when her voice goes quiet, when bruises peek from beneath her sleeve. They have mastered the art of not seeing. But today is different. Admiral Harlow sits at the counter, watching with eyes trained to notice what others miss. When coffee spills and angry words fill the air, the room falls silent as he stands, his voice calm but commanding. What follows will change everything for a woman who thought she had become invisible. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when someone finally sees what everyone else has trained themselves to ignore. The first light of dawn crept across Port Haven, painting the weathered buildings in shades of gold and amber. Fishing boats slipped from their moorings, heading out to sea as the naval base across the harbor began to stir. In this liminal hour between night and morning, Marlowe's diner stood as a beacon, its neon sign flickering to life, promising warmth and sustenance to a town that survived on routine. Elora Reeve moved through the empty diner with practiced precision. 3 years of opening shifts had engraved the ritual into her muscles. Lights first, then coffee brewing, griddle warming, tables wiped down in clockwise order. Her movements were economical, almost military in their efficiency. No wasted motion, no unnecessary steps. The methodical pattern kept her thoughts contained, focused on the task rather than the dull ache in her ribs or the fresh bruises hidden beneath her long-sleeved uniform. When she reached the counter, Elora counted out sugar packets into each container, exactly 15 white, 8 blue, 6 pink. Not 14, not 16, 15. The consistency mattered. Control over these small details was sometimes all she had. The back door creaked open as Vern Marlowe shuffled in, his 70-year-old frame bent from decades of kitchen work. He watched Elora from the pass-through window, noting how she adjusted her collar higher than usual today. "Morning, Elle," he called out, voice gruff with sleep and concern. "Coffee smells good." "Morning, Vern," she replied, her customer service smile sliding into place with automatic ease. "Supply order came up short again. We're missing half the bacon we need for the week." Vern nodded, but his eyes fixed on a shadow of discoloration visible above her collar. "That's the 3rd time this month they've shorted us." He paused, then added carefully, "That's also the 3rd time this month you've come in looking like you lost a fight." Elora's hands continued their work, not missing a beat as she arranged silverware rolls. "You should see the door frame. I think it's winning." "One of these days, you'll tell me what's really going on," Vern said, his voice low enough that it could be ignored if she chose. She placed the last silverware roll in perfect alignment with the others before responding. "Nothing that doesn't happen in a dozen houses in this town, Vern." Before he could press further, she shifted topics with practiced deflection. "Naval conference starts today. We should expect extra uniforms at lunch." Vern held her gaze a moment longer, then sighed and turned back to the kitchen. The unspoken agreement between them stretched thin but held. He wouldn't push, and she wouldn't break. Not today. Probably not tomorrow either. The first customers arrived at 6:30. Fishermen mostly, their clothes carrying the scent of salt and diesel. They filled the counter seats, leaving the booths for the shipyard workers who would arrive at 7. Elora moved among them like a ghost, present enough to refill coffee, take orders, and maintain light conversation, yet somehow untouchable, a warm, professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Heard there's some big brass coming in from Washington," Jack Mercer mentioned between bites of his usual breakfast. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast dry, hash browns crispy. "Some kind of inspection at the base." "Navy's always inspecting something," another fisherman replied. "Remember last summer? Had admirals crawling all over town for a week, then nothing." Elora poured coffee with a steady hand, listening without contributing. The naval base and its rhythms had once been the center of her world. Now she preferred the predictable patterns of the diner. Who ordered what? Who tipped well? Who needed extra napkins without asking? The Navy could keep its inspections and brass. She had worked too hard to become invisible to risk drawing attention now. By 8:30, the breakfast crowd had thinned, giving Elora a moment to catch her breath in the back storage room. She leaned against a shelf of canned goods, allowing herself 30 seconds with her eyes closed. Just 30. Enough to reset, but not enough to remember. When she emerged, a new customer sat at the counter, Dr. Abernathy from the medical clinic, her sharp eyes tracking Alora's movement across the diner. "Just coffee today, Sarah?" Alora asked, reaching for the pot. "And conversation, if you have a minute," the doctor replied, her voice deliberately casual. "Haven't seen you for your follow-up." Alora poured the coffee with a slight hesitation, the only break in her perfect rhythm. "Been busy, you know how it is." "Too busy to make sure those ribs healed properly?" Dr. Abernathy kept her voice low. "The x-rays showed older fractures too, Alora. Multiple healing stages." "I'm clumsy," Alora said flatly. "Always have been." "I've known a lot of clumsy people in my practice," the doctor responded. "Funny how their accidents always seem to happen in private, with the same witness." The bell above the door chimed, saving Alora from responding as the mid-morning. Regulars began to arrive. She moved away, feeling the doctor's concerned gaze following her across the diner. Another crack in her carefully constructed invisibility. Another person seeing too much. The morning progressed in its familiar rhythm. Coffee poured, orders taken, bills paid. Alora maintained her practiced efficiency, her perfect waitress persona, never slipping despite the growing ache in her side. Around 11, she reached across a table to collect empty plates, her sleeve riding up to reveal a pattern of bruises in different healing stages across her forearm. "That looks painful," the customer commented with a frown. Alora pulled her sleeve down in a smooth, practiced motion. "Door frames in this town have it out for me," she said with a forced laugh. The customer chuckled uncomfortably and returned to her meal. Across the diner, Vern exchanged a knowing glance with Marla, the older waitress who worked the afternoon shift. Near the window, naval security vehicles passed by, heading toward the base. The exchange was brief, unremarkable, but to Alora, it felt like another hairline fracture in her carefully constructed facade. Port Haven was small enough that people noticed things, the bruises, the hushed arguments, the way she flinched at sudden movements, but large enough that they could pretend not to. The unspoken agreement of small towns: we don't keep secrets, we just agree not to talk about them. As the lunch preparation began, Alora felt a familiar tension building at the base of her skull. Noon meant the naval personnel would begin arriving, officers who might recognize her despite the 3 years and drastic changes in her appearance. Noon also meant Rook would make his appearance at precisely 12:30, as he did every Tuesday and Thursday. Rook Caldwell owned half the rental properties in Port Haven, including the small apartment above the hardware store where Alora lived. He sat on the town council, sponsored the summer festival, and maintained the careful image of a local success story. The Port Haven boy who'd made good. What the town chose not to see was how that success had been built on calculating cruelty and strategic relationships with people who could be useful. Alora had been useful in ways Rook hadn't expected when he first rented to her. A former naval intelligence officer with knowledge of classified operations made for valuable leverage in certain circles. The fact that she was beautiful, damaged, and desperate for anonymity had been a bonus he exploited fully. When Marla arrived for her shift, Alora took her scheduled break, slipping into the back storage room for a rare moment alone. She stared at her reflection in a stainless steel cabinet, the distorted image somehow more honest than any mirror. Gently, she touched her bruised wrist, then reached into her pocket and removed a worn challenge coin with a naval insignia. Her fingers traced its surface with muscle memory, a ritual she performed when the walls felt like they were closing in. The operation that coin commemorated had saved 37 lives and shattered her own. The patterns she'd identified, the analysis that led to discovering the ambush, it had been her finest work. Work that couldn't be acknowledged because the mission remained classified. Work that had left her with nightmares so vivid she sometimes woke up screaming in code sequences. The bell at the counter rang, forcing Alora to quickly return the coin to hiding. Break time over, back to the routine, back to being invisible. The lunch rush hit with its usual controlled chaos. Orders called, plates delivered, tables cleared. Alora moved through it all with mechanical precision, her body on autopilot while her mind remained vigilant. More naval uniforms than usual today. The inspection rumors must have substance. At exactly 12:30, Rook Caldwell entered the diner with 3 associates in tow. Developers from the mainland, based on their expensive casual attire and calculating assessment of the room. The diner's atmosphere shifted subtly. Conversations adjusted. People made room. Power had its own gravity in small towns. "Elora," Rook called immediately, not bothering to wait to be seated. "Corner booth, coffee for everyone." She acknowledged with a professional nod, maintaining her composure as she gathered menus. 3 years of practice had taught her how to move through these interactions without betraying fear. Fear gave him satisfaction. Fear was currency he collected. As she approached with the coffee pot, one of the developers eyed her with open appraisal. "This the one you mentioned, Rook, from the Hawthorne Street property?" Rook's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Elora provides excellent service, don't you, sweetheart? Always attentive to detail." The implied threat in his words made her fingers tighten around the coffee pot handle. The reference to details was deliberate, a reminder of the leverage he held over her, the operational details he'd threatened to expose if she ever tried to leave, details that could endanger former teammates if revealed to the wrong people. "Today's special is the grilled salmon," she said instead, her voice neutral. "Soup is clam chowder." As she poured coffee, she noticed a table near the counter she hadn't registered before. 3 naval officers in formal uniform, 2 younger men flanking an older officer with admiral's insignia. Something about his profile triggered a flash of recognition that she immediately suppressed. Recognition was dangerous. Recognition meant connections to a past she'd worked hard to erase. The diner grew busier, forcing Elora to move faster, juggling orders while maintaining her professional mask. Each time she passed Rook's table, he found reason to summon her. Coffee too cold, water glasses unfilled, silverware spotted. Each interaction a small performance of control for his business associate's benefit. "Elora," he called again as she passed with a loaded tray. "When you're done playing Waitress, we need menus." The deliberately dismissive tone caused several nearby diners to glance up, then quickly away. No one wanted to witness the subtle humiliations Rook specialized in. No one wanted to acknowledge the dynamic that played out regularly in their presence. What Elora didn't notice, focused on maintaining her composure, was that the Admiral had turned slightly in his seat, his attention drawn by Rook's tone. His eyes followed her movement across the diner with professional assessment, noting details others missed. The precision of her movements, the way she positioned herself to keep the counter between her and certain customers, the slight hesitation before approaching Rook's table. "Sir, we should head to the base soon," one of the younger officers murmured. "The briefing is scheduled for 1400. "A few more minutes, Lieutenant," the Admiral replied quietly, his eyes still tracking Elora as she navigated the crowded diner. As the lunch rush peaked, Elora balanced multiple demands with practiced efficiency, but the constant vigilance required to manage Rook's table while serving others took its toll. Her hands developed a subtle tremor, noticeable only to the most observant. During a particularly hectic moment, she attempted to clear plates from Rook's table while balancing a coffee pot in her other hand. When she reached across to collect an empty glass, Rook grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the existing bruises. "In a hurry today, Elora?" he asked, voice low, but carrying enough for his companions to hear. "Someone important waiting for you?" "Just busy, Mr. Caldwell," she replied evenly, though her pulse raced beneath his grip. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" "You know what's interesting about our arrangement," he continued, not releasing her. "How quickly things could change if certain information found its way to certain people. Loyalty matters in the Navy, doesn't it? What happens to those who compromise security?" The veiled threat landed precisely as intended. Elora's hand jerked reflexively, spilling coffee onto the sleeve of one of the developers. "What the hell?" the man exclaimed, jumping up. Rook released her wrist and stood abruptly. "Are you completely incompetent? Do you know what this suit costs?" The diner fell silent. Every head turned toward the commotion, then just as quickly away. The universal response to public confrontation in small communities. "Don't get involved. Don't make eye contact. This isn't your problem." "I'm sorry," Elora said automatically, reaching for a napkin. "Let me help with that." "You've done enough," Rook snapped, his voice rising. "You think because you served a few years you deserve special treatment? You're just a waitress who couldn't hack it. Maybe it's time everyone knew exactly why you left the service." The threat hung in the air, explicit now, rather than implied. Elora felt the walls of her carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. If he revealed what he knew about her past, limited though it was, the questions would start. Questions would lead to connections. Connections would lead back to the classified operation and the teammates whose lives might be endangered by exposure. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, and complicit. Heads down, eyes averted. The universal language of, not my problem. Until a chair scraped back near the counter. Is there a problem here? The voice cut through the diner without being raised, calm, measured, and carrying absolute authority. The Admiral had stood, his posture relaxed but commanding, his gaze level. The room froze. Even Rook, recognizing the rank insignia, hesitated before forcing a smile. "Just a staff issue, Admiral," he said, his tone shifting to false camaraderie. "Nothing for you to concern yourself with." The Admiral ignored him completely, his focus solely on Alora. "Ma'am, did he touch you?" The directness of the question startled her, but it was his next words that shattered 3 years of careful invisibility. "Not just today," the Admiral clarified, his eyes never leaving hers. "Has he touched you before?" Elora stood frozen between two impossibilities: continue the lie that was slowly killing her, or risk the truth that might destroy what remained. Either way, there would be no going back, not after what the Admiral had just asked, not after what everyone had just heard. With the weight of every eye in the diner upon her, Elora felt the careful walls she'd built beginning to crumble. The choice before her seemed impossible: remain invisible and trapped, or become visible and face unknown consequences. 3 years of perfect silence hung in the balance as she met the Admiral's steady gaze. In that suspended moment, Elora realized something had shifted. The man before her wasn't just any naval officer. There was recognition in his eyes, not of her face perhaps, but of something deeper. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, when no one else had bothered to look past the waitress uniform in years. The next words she spoke would determine everything. And for the first time since she'd arrived in Port Haven, Elora wasn't certain which path terrified her more, continuing to disappear or finally being found. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where every path forward required courage you weren't sure you possessed? Share your story of a moment when silence felt safer than truth in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, join our community by subscribing. Sometimes the bravest act is simply being seen when you've worked so hard to become invisible. In that frozen moment, with every eye in the diner upon her, Elora gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Just enough to be undeniable, just enough to change everything. The Admiral's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Without breaking his gaze from Elora's, he deliberately removed his cap, revealing a jagged scar that ran along his right temple. The gesture seemed ceremonial somehow, as he placed the cap on the counter with precision, not carelessly, but with intent, as if setting down a piece on a chessboard. Elora's eyes widened slightly. The scar, the deliberate movement, a fragmented memory trying to surface. "Lieutenant Commander Ames, Lieutenant Wexler," the Admiral addressed the two younger officers without turning. "Please escort Mr. Caldwell outside. I believe he's finished his meal." Rook's face flushed dark red. "Do you have any idea who I am in this town?" "I have the mayor's personal number. I'm on the Harbor Commission." The Admiral still hadn't looked at him, his focus unwavering on Elora. "And I command the 5th Naval Special Warfare Group. Introductions concluded, gentlemen." The two officers moved with synchronized precision, their posture non-threatening but unmistakably resolute as they flanked Rook. Neither touched him, but their presence created an inevitable path toward the door. Rook glanced around the diner, seeking allies among the regulars whose respect he'd cultivated for years. He found only averted gazes. Even his business associates remained seated, suddenly fascinated by the contents of their coffee cups. "This is ridiculous," Rook sputtered, though he began moving toward the door. "This is a private business matter between me and my tenant. You have no jurisdiction here." "We're not enforcing jurisdiction," Lieutenant Wexler said quietly. "We're just going to have a conversation outside." As they reached the door, Rook turned back toward Elora. "This isn't over. You know what happens if you talk." The Admiral finally turned his head to look at Rook, his expression remaining calm, but his voice dropping to a register that carried unmistakable warning. "Mr. Caldwell, I'd advise against making statements that could be interpreted as threats in my presence. It complicates matters unnecessarily." After they exited, the diner remained suspended in uncomfortable silence. The Admiral moved from the counter to stand near Elora, his presence solid but not imposing. "Some men mistake fear for respect," he said quietly. "It's an error I don't tolerate in my command or my community." Elora's professional mask had slipped, revealing the vulnerability beneath. "Why are you doing this? Is there somewhere private we can speak?" he asked instead of answering. Vern emerged from the kitchen, having witnessed everything. "Use my office," he said, gesturing toward the back. "Marla can cover the floor." Elora led the way mechanically, her mind racing. Recognition flickered at the edges of her consciousness. The Admiral's scar, the way he'd placed his cap down. There was significance there, a code she should understand but couldn't quite grasp. Vern's office was little more than a storage closet with a desk wedged inside, but it offered privacy. The Admiral closed the door behind them, then maintained a respectful distance, careful not to make her feel cornered. "You don't remember me," he said. Not a question. "Should I?" Elora countered, her voice steadier now that they were away from prying eyes. The Admiral removed a worn leather wallet from his pocket, extracting a photograph protected by a plastic sleeve. He placed it on the desk between them, without comment. Elora stared at the image, a younger version of herself in naval dress whites receiving a commendation. Next to her stood a younger version of the man before her, before the scar, before the silver had appeared at his temples. "Lieutenant Commander Elora Rayburn," he said quietly. "Naval intelligence, specialized in pattern analysis, attached to SEAL team operations in the Strait of Hormuz, 2014. The name hit her like a physical blow. Elora Rayburn. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 3 years. Hadn't been that person in 3 years. "That was another life," she said, not touching the photograph. "A life that saved 37 men, including me," the Admiral replied. "Your analysis identified the ambush pattern when no one else could see it." Elora's fingers moved to her pocket unconsciously, where the challenge coin rested. "Admiral Harlow," she said, as his name finally clicked into place. "Thaddeus Harlow, you were a commander then." "And you were the best intelligence analyst I'd ever worked with," he confirmed, "until you disappeared." A humorless laugh escaped her. "I didn't disappear. I was erased." Admiral Harlow's expression remained composed, but his eyes reflected understanding. "What happened after the operation? The official record is incomplete." Elora leaned against the desk, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was ebbing, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. "I couldn't sleep," she began, the words coming haltingly after years of silence. "Couldn't function. The patterns wouldn't stop. I saw threats everywhere, connections no one else could see. When I tried to get help..." "They buried it," Harlow finished, "because the mission was classified." She nodded. "Discharged with adjustment disorder. No benefits, no support network, just paperwork and silence. Erased." The Admiral's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "When did you come to Port Haven?" 3 years ago. It was small enough to disappear in, big enough that no one asked too many questions." Elora straightened, her professional mask beginning to reassemble. "Why are you here, Admiral? Why now?" "When I became Admiral, I gained access to personnel records I couldn't see before," Harlow explained. "The discrepancies in your file raised flags. The official reason for your discharge didn't match your service record or performance evaluations." "So this naval inspection is about me?" Elora asked skeptically. "The inspection is real," Harlow clarified, "but I specifically requested this assignment when intelligence suggested you might be in this area. It's taken 3 years to track you down, Lieutenant Commander." "Don't call me that," Elora said sharply. "That person doesn't exist anymore." "And Rook Caldwell?" Harlow asked, shifting topics without pushing. "How does he fit into this?" Elora's expression hardened. "He owns half the properties in town, including my apartment. When I first arrived, I needed a place without formal background checks or references. And he discovered who you were." She nodded. "Not everything, just enough. He has connections in the medical records department at the VA clinic in Westport. He found fragments of my file during one of my attempts to get treatment." "And used it against you," Harlow stated rather than asked. "He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd expose operational details, that teammates could be endangered." Elora's voice remained steady, but her hands had begun to tremble again. "I couldn't risk it. Not after everything that happened. Admiral Harlow's expression darkened for the first time. He lied. The operational details remain classified at the highest levels. He couldn't know enough to endanger anyone. But I didn't know that, Elora replied, and I couldn't take the chance. So you stayed, and he escalated. Harlow's eyes flicked briefly to her wrist, where the bruises were partially visible beneath her sleeve. Elora didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. After a moment, she asked the question that had been building since the confrontation began. What happens now? That depends on what you want to happen, Harlow said carefully. But first, I'd like your permission to correct the record, not just the official one, the public one too. What does that mean? It means walking back into that diner and acknowledging who you are and what you did, Harlow said. The mission details remain classified, but your service and your sacrifice deserve recognition. Elora stiffened. I don't want recognition. I want peace. And you deserve both, Harlow countered. But peace doesn't come from invisibility, Lieutenant. It comes from truth. Before Elora could respond, a knock came at the door. Lieutenant Wexler's voice followed. Admiral, we've returned. The situation is stable. Harlow looked to Elora, waiting for her decision. In that moment, she realized he was offering her a choice. Stay hidden or step into the light. Neither easy, neither guaranteed, but a choice nonetheless when for years she'd felt she had none. Okay, she said finally. Let's correct the record. When they emerged from the office, the diner had returned to its normal activity, though conversations hushed briefly as Elora and the Admiral returned to the main floor. The two naval officers stood near the counter, their posture relaxed but vigilant. There was no sign of Rook. Where is he? Elora asked quietly. Mr. Caldwell has been escorted to the Port Haven Sheriff's office, Lieutenant Commander Ames replied. Sheriff Taylor expressed interest in discussing several outstanding complaints against Mr. Caldwell that had previously been overlooked. Admiral Harlow nodded approval, then scanned the diner. Among the customers were several naval personnel in uniform, junior officers and enlisted sailors on their lunch break from the base. Your attention, please, Harlow called, his voice carrying authority without being raised. The diner fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. Elora fought the urge to retreat, to become invisible again, as attention focused in their direction. 10 years ago, Harlow began, an intelligence officer made a call that saved 37 lives, including mine. The mission remains classified, but her courage doesn't. He turned to face Elora directly and rendered a perfect formal salute. Without hesitation, Lieutenant Commander Ames and Lieutenant Wexler followed suit. After a moment of confusion, the other naval personnel throughout the diner stood and joined the salute. The civilian patrons watched in confused respect, not understanding the significance but recognizing the gravity of the moment. Vern stood in the kitchen doorway, his weathered face reflecting something between pride and regret. Pride for what Elora had been, regret for what he'd failed to see. For a moment, Elora stood frozen, the years of hiding warring with the muscle memory of her training. Then, slowly, she straightened her posture and returned the salute with perfect form, acknowledging her past for the first time in 3 years. When the salutes were lowered, a different kind of silence filled the diner. Not the tense, uncomfortable silence of conflict, but the reverent quiet of recognition. Something had shifted in the room's understanding of the woman they'd seen every day but never truly noticed. Lieutenant Commander Rayburn's service record will be formally corrected, Admiral Harlow announced, and her contributions properly acknowledged. As conversations slowly resumed, Elora felt oddly exposed, yet unburdened. The carefully constructed invisibility she'd maintained for years had been stripped away, leaving her vulnerable, but somehow lighter. What happens now? She asked Harlow quietly as they moved toward the counter. That's largely up to you, he replied. But first, there's something you should know about Rook Caldwell and his claims about operational information. Before he could continue, the diner door opened and Sheriff Taylor entered, a tall woman with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her eyes scanned the room, settling on Admiral Harlow and Elora. Admiral, she acknowledged with a nod. Ms. Reeve, or should I say Lieutenant Commander Rayburn. Either is fine, Sheriff, Elora replied, feeling strange hearing both names acknowledged openly. I need to take your statement regarding Rook Caldwell, the sheriff continued. But there's something you should know first. Once we brought him in, several other complaints came forward. Seems your situation wasn't unique. What kind of complaints? Harlow asked. Extortion, harassment, similar patterns with different victims, Sheriff Taylor explained. Mr. Caldwell appears to have made a habit of finding people with secrets and exploiting them. Your case has given others the courage to come forward. The news settled over Elora with complex emotion, not relief exactly. The damage had been done, but perhaps vindication that she hadn't been alone, that her experience wasn't isolated. There's something else, the sheriff added, her expression troubled. We found documents in his possession, copies of medical records, service records, financial information, not just yours, dozens of people, and communications with individuals outside Port Haven who might be interested in such information. Admiral Harlow's expression darkened. Blackmail material. That's our working theory, Sheriff Taylor confirmed. Though it may be more complicated, some of these communications suggest he was feeding information to parties with interest in naval operations. The implication hung in the air, not just a controlling abuser, but potentially something more dangerous. I'd like to continue this conversation at the station, if you're willing, the sheriff said to Elora. Your statement could be crucial in building a case. Elora felt oddly calm despite the revelations. The patterns were emerging, connections becoming clear, not in the frantic, overwhelming way that had characterized her post-mission breakdowns, but with clarity and purpose. Her analytical mind, long suppressed beneath trauma and fear, was re-engaging with the problem. I'll come with you, she agreed, but I need a few minutes first. As the sheriff stepped outside to make a call, Elora turned to Admiral Harlow. You said there was something I should know about Rook's claims regarding operational information. Harlow nodded. The operation you analyzed, the one that saved my team, was compartmentalized. Even the officers involved didn't have access to all details. There's no way Caldwell could have obtained anything that would endanger former teammates. Then why did I believe him? Elora asked, though the answer was already forming in her mind. Because trauma makes us vulnerable to manipulation, Harlow replied simply. He exploited your protective instinct toward your teammates, knowing you would sacrifice yourself before risking them. The truth of it settled in Elora's chest. All this time, she'd been a prisoner of fears that had no foundation. The walls of her cage had existed only in her mind, reinforced by a man who recognized her vulnerability and exploited it systematically. I need to get my things from the apartment, she said, thinking practically now. If what the sheriff suggests is true, there may be evidence there. Lieutenant Wexler can accompany you, Harlow offered, for security and as a witness. Elora nodded agreement, then glanced around the diner. The lunch crowd was thinning, but several customers remained, watching the interactions with poorly disguised interest. Her life as invisible waitress Elora Reeve was effectively over. Whatever came next would be different. Vern, she called to the owner, who had been hovering nearby. I need to step out. The older man nodded. Take whatever time you need, Elle. Job's still here when you're ready. The simple acceptance in his voice, acknowledgement of both who she had been and who she might become, brought unexpected emotion to her throat. Thank you, she managed. Outside, the coastal air felt different somehow, sharper, clearer. The naval base across the harbor, which she'd avoided looking at directly for 3 years, stood as a reminder of her past life. Not a threat now, but not quite a comfort either. Lieutenant Wexler fell into step beside her as they walked toward the apartment above the hardware store. His presence was unobtrusive but vigilant, scanning rooflines and alleyways with professional assessment. You do that automatically, don't you? Elora observed. The threat assessment. Wexler smiled slightly. Occupational habit. You probably did it too, in your way. Pattern analysis, she confirmed. Everything forms patterns if you know how to look. That's what saved the Admiral's team, isn't it? Wexler asked, recognizing a pattern no one else saw. Elora nodded but didn't elaborate. Some habits of secrecy remained ingrained despite the day's revelations. As they approached the hardware store, Elora slowed her pace. He'll have left something, she said quietly. Rook never leaves situations unprepared. There will be contingencies. What kind of contingencies? Wexler asked, instantly alert. Not explosives or anything dramatic, Elora clarified. But information, insurance, something to maintain control even if he's removed from the equation. Her analytical mind was fully engaged now, examining possibilities. He threatened to expose operational details if I ever tried to leave, but the Admiral says those details weren't accessible to him. So either he was bluffing entirely, Wexler reasoned, or he has something else he was using as leverage. Something he believed would be equally effective in controlling me, Elora concluded. Her steps quickened as the pattern crystallized. We need to check the apartment, now. The hardware store owner looked up in surprise as they entered, his expression shifting from welcome to concern when he recognized Elora's companion in naval uniform. Everything okay, Elora? He asked cautiously. Fine, Bill, she replied with forced calm. Just need to get upstairs for something. The back stairs to her apartment creaked under their weight, the narrow passage forcing Lieutenant Wexler to follow rather than lead. At the top landing, Elora paused, her hand on the doorknob. Wait, she said. Something's wrong? Wexler tensed. You think someone's inside? Elora shook her head, examining the door. No, but the lock's been used recently. See the scratch marks? Fresh. She pointed to tiny metal shavings on the threshold, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. Someone's been here since I left for work this morning. Wexler moved slightly in front of her. Let me go first. It's clear now, Elora said with certainty. Whoever it was is gone. They got what they came for. Nevertheless, she let Wexler enter first, watching as he performed a quick professional sweep of the small apartment. One main room served as living area and kitchenette, with a small bedroom and bathroom off to the side. The space was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized. Everything in its place, no clutter. Clear, Wexler confirmed. Elora moved immediately to a loose floorboard near the bed, prying it up to reveal a small hiding space. The challenge coin was still in her pocket, but other items she'd kept hidden. Her discharge papers, a flash drive with personal photos, a small notebook, were gone. They knew exactly where to look, she said, standing, which means Rook told them. Told who? Wexler asked, already on his radio reporting the break-in. Elora moved to the kitchenette, opening a drawer that contained neatly arranged utensils. She counted quickly, then checked another drawer. Whoever he's been feeding information to, the people the sheriff mentioned. She turned in a slow circle, her eyes cataloging the apartment with professional assessment. They've taken specific items, personal identifiers, documentation, nothing valuable in the conventional sense. Identity theft? Wexler suggested. Elora shook her head. No, this is about the operation, about what I know. But the Admiral said the operation details were compartmentalized, that Caldwell couldn't have access. Caldwell couldn't, Elora agreed, the pattern becoming clearer. But what if he's working for someone who could? The implication hung in the air between them. Not just a local abuser exploiting vulnerable people, but potentially something more coordinated, more deliberately targeted. We need to tell the Admiral, Wexler said, already moving toward the door. Elora remained still, her mind racing through possibilities. Why now? She asked, more to herself than to Wexler. After 3 years of control, why would Rook risk exposure today? The answer came with sudden clarity. Because something's happening, something connected to the naval inspection, something that makes the information worth the risk. She rejoined Wexler at the door. Her demeanor shifted from the traumatized victim of the diner confrontation to the intelligence analyst she'd once been. Lieutenant, she said formally, I believe we may have a serious security situation developing. We need to speak to Admiral Harlow immediately. As they hurried back toward the diner, Elora's mind assembled the fragments into a coherent picture. Rook's escalating, aggression, the timing of the naval inspection, the targeted break-in, the missing documents, patterns within patterns, all converging towards something imminent. For 3 years, she'd tried to outrun her past by becoming invisible. Now that same past might be the key to understanding the danger unfolding around them. The analytical skills she'd suppressed to survive were suddenly her greatest asset. When they reached the diner, Admiral Harlow was outside speaking with Sheriff Taylor. Both turned at their approach, registering the urgency in their expressions. Someone broke into my apartment, Elora reported without preamble. Targeted items only, nothing of conventional value. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Harlow's expression darkened. Connected to Caldwell? Almost certainly, Elora confirmed. But I think he's working for someone else, someone with specific interest in the Strait of Hormuz operation. That operation has been inactive for years, Harlow said. though his tone suggested he was already considering the possibilities. The operation, yes, Elora agreed. But the network we uncovered, the supply chains, the personnel involved, those elements could still be active. The analytical clarity that had once made her valuable to naval intelligence was fully engaged now, connecting points of data across time and space. Admiral, I think Rook has been collecting information for someone with ongoing interest in naval operations, and I think your inspection triggered some kind of response. Before Harlow could reply, his secure phone buzzed. The brief conversation that followed confirmed Elora's suspicions. Security breach at the base, he reported as he ended the call. Someone attempted to access the secure server room 20 minutes ago. They were repelled, but escaped. The implications crystallized into certainty. Whatever had been set in motion was accelerating rapidly. It's not about me, Elora realized aloud. It never was. I was just convenient, someone with potential access to information who could be easily controlled. And when that control was threatened today, Sheriff Taylor added, following the logic, they moved to Plan B. Lieutenant Wexler's radio crackled with an urgent report from Lieutenant Commander Ames, who had remained at the sheriff's office with the prisoner. Admiral, Wexler relayed, Caldwell is demanding a deal, says he has information about an imminent threat to the base, says he'll only speak with you directly. The group exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation settling over them. What had begun as an intervention in an abusive situation had unveiled something far more complex and potentially dangerous. I'm going with you, Elora said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Whatever he knows involves the operation I analyzed. I'm your best resource for separating fact from manipulation. Admiral Harlow studied her for a moment, seeing not the traumatized waitress of the morning, but the intelligence officer whose analysis had once saved his team. He nodded once in acknowledgement. Lieutenant Commander Rayburn, he said formally, reinstating her rank with a simple acknowledgement. Consider yourself temporarily recalled to active duty as a civilian consultant. As they moved toward the vehicles, Elora felt the weight of her dual identities, the invisible waitress she'd become and the analyst she'd once been, finally merge into something new. The fear that had defined her existence for 3 years hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into focused alertness. Whatever was unfolding at the naval base, whatever Rook Caldwell's connection to it might be, she was uniquely positioned to unravel it. The patterns were there, waiting to be recognized. And for the first time in years, Elora Rayburn was ready to see them clearly. Have you ever discovered that what seemed like your greatest weakness was actually your hidden strength? Share your story of rediscovering your true capabilities in the comments below. If this journey of reclaiming power resonates with you, subscribe to join our community, where we explore the complexities of human resilience. Sometimes our most valuable skills are the ones we've hidden away, even from ourselves. The sheriff's office in Port Haven occupied the first floor of the town's municipal building, a structure that had begun its life as a customs house in the previous century. Inside, the institutional green walls and fluorescent lighting created an atmosphere that was both familiar and alienating to Elora. Law enforcement spaces shared a certain DNA with military installations. Functional, impersonal, designed to process rather than comfort. Sheriff Taylor led them through the main bullpen toward the interview rooms in the back. Deputies looked up from their desks as the unusual procession passed. The sheriff, a naval admiral in full uniform, a lieutenant, and a woman still wearing a diner waitress uniform. Their expressions registered curiosity and confusion in equal measure. He's in interview 2, Taylor said, stopping outside a door with a small observation window. Lieutenant Commander Ames is with him. Caldwell's been demanding a lawyer, then demanding a deal, then threatening to stay silent. Classic manipulation patterns. Through the window, Elora could see Rook seated at the metal table, his usual confident posture notably absent. Lieutenant Commander Ames stood in the corner, his stance relaxed but vigilant. I want to observe first, Admiral Harlow decided, before he sees me. The sheriff nodded. Observation room is next door. You'll have audio and visual. As they entered the small adjoining room with its one-way glass, Elora felt a surge of unexpected emotion, seeing Rook reduced to this environment. Not pity, she was far from that, but a complex satisfaction in seeing the careful facade of local businessman stripped away, revealing the manipulator beneath. He's frightened, she observed, her analytical mind automatically cataloging his behavioral tells. Not just of the legal situation. Something else? Admiral Harlow studied both Rook and Elora's reaction to him. "What's your assessment, Lieutenant Commander? Is this performance or genuine concern?" The use of her rank still felt strange after 3 years, but Elora found herself responding to the professional acknowledgement. Both. He's performing distress to create leverage, but the underlying fear is genuine. Look at his hands. He keeps checking his watch. He's waiting for something specific. Through the speaker, they could hear Rook's voice, pitched louder than necessary. "I already told you. I need to speak with Admiral Harlow directly. This is a matter of national security, not some local complaint." Lieutenant Commander Ames remained impassive. "The Admiral will decide if and when he speaks with you. In the meantime, these local complaints involve serious allegations of assault, extortion, and potential espionage." "Espionage," Rook scoffed, though the word visibly unsettled him. "I'm a businessman, a property owner. I have contacts, not conspiracies." "Contacts who break into apartments?" Ames countered. "Contacts who attempt to breach naval security?" Rook's expression shifted, surprise quickly masked by calculation. "If someone accessed the base, it has nothing to do with me." "He didn't know about the base breach," Elora said quietly. "That wasn't part of the plan." Sheriff Taylor glanced at her. "What do you think is going on here?" Elora's mind worked through the possibilities, assembling the fragments into a coherent picture. "I think Rook has been collecting information for someone, maybe selling it, maybe trading for influence, but I don't think he knows the full scope of what his contacts are doing with that information." "A middleman," Harlow concluded, "potentially unwitting." "Or willfully ignorant," Elora amended. "As long as he benefited, he wouldn't ask too many questions." She stepped closer to the glass, studying Rook with the detached analysis that had once been her professional strength. "The question is whether he knows enough to be useful to us." Admiral Harlow made his decision. "Let's find out." When they entered the interview room, Rook's expression cycled rapidly through relief, wariness, and calculation at the sight of Admiral Harlow. When he spotted Elora behind the Admiral, his eyes narrowed with genuine hatred. "You've caused quite a situation, Mr. Caldwell," Harlow began without preamble, taking a seat across from Rook. "Breaking and entering, assault, extortion, interfering with a military investigation, potentially aiding a security breach at a naval installation." "I had nothing to do with any base breach," Rook insisted. "That's what I've been trying to tell your man here." "But you do have information about something," Harlow pressed. "Something you believe is valuable enough to bargain with?" Rook's eyes darted to Elora, then back to the Admiral. "I want immunity and protection, then we can talk." "That's not how this works," Sheriff Taylor interjected. "You're facing serious charges under my jurisdiction. Any deal starts with full cooperation, not demands." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Rook insisted, an edge of genuine fear entering his voice. "These aren't people you mess around with." "Who, exactly?" Harlow asked. Rook remained silent, his eyes flicking to his watch again. The gesture confirmed Elora's suspicion that he was waiting for something specific. A deadline, an event, a signal. "What time is it supposed to happen, Rook?" she asked directly, stepping forward. "Whatever your contacts have planned at the base, what's the timetable?" The question caught him off guard, his expression confirming her accuracy before he could mask it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You've been watching the clock every 30 seconds since we entered," Elora continued, falling easily into the interrogation rhythm. "You're waiting for something. Is it a phone call, an extraction, or is it whatever's being planned at the base?" "I want a lawyer," Rook said flatly. "Of course," Sheriff Taylor replied. "That's your right. And while we wait for one to arrive from the mainland, the naval base will continue with its security protocols in response to the breach attempt, including full lockdown, communications blackout, and suspension of all civilian contractor access." The implications of this landed visibly on Rook. Whatever he had been waiting for required access to the base, access that would now be cut off. Admiral Harlow leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm not interested in local criminal matters. That's Sheriff Taylor's jurisdiction. My concern is strictly the security of naval personnel and operations. If you have information that could prevent a security incident, providing it now would reflect favorably on your situation." Rook's calculating mind visibly worked through the scenarios, weighing self-preservation against whatever loyalties or fears governed his actions. Finally, he spoke. "It's not an attack," he said carefully. "Nothing like that. It's an extraction." "Of what?" Harlow pressed. "Not what. Who?" Rook's eyes fixed on Allura. "They never cared about you. You were just the access point. The person they want is at the base for the inspection. A Dr. Farley Rowan. He's been feeding information about prototype surveillance systems to my contacts for months. But something spooked him, and he stopped communicating. They need to extract him before he talks." The name struck Allura like a physical blow. Dr. Farley Rowan had been part of the technical team that developed the surveillance algorithm she'd used to identify the ambush pattern in the Strait of Hormuz operation. The connection was too specific to be coincidence. "When is this extraction scheduled?" Harlow asked, his voice betraying no reaction to the name. Rook checked his watch again. 15 minutes ago, but with the base on lockdown. He didn't finish the thought, but the implication was clear. The plan had likely been compromised, which put Rook in an increasingly precarious position with his contacts. Admiral Harlow stood abruptly. "Lieutenant Commander Ames, remain with Mr. Caldwell and Sheriff Taylor. Lieutenant Wexler, with me." He turned to Allura. "Lieutenant Commander Rayburn, your assistance would be valuable, if you're willing." The formal acknowledgement of her expertise rather than an order reflected her civilian status, giving her choice in the matter. Allura didn't hesitate. "Of course, Admiral." As they left the interview room, Rook called after them. "They'll know I talked. I need protection." Sheriff Taylor closed the door on his protests. "I'll arrange for additional security here. If these contacts of his are as concerning as he suggests, they may attempt to silence him." "Agreed," Harlow said. "Lieutenant Wexler, inform base security about Dr. Rowan. Full credentials check and discreet surveillance, but no detention yet. We don't want to spook him if Caldwell's information is accurate." As Wexler stepped away to make the call, Harlow turned to Allura. "Dr. Rowan worked on your operation. The connection seems unlikely to be coincidence." "No," Allura agreed. "He developed the algorithm I modified to identify the ambush pattern. He would have had access to the full operational details, including the network we uncovered." "A network that might still be operational," Harlow concluded grimly. "Using different channels, different personnel, but the same basic structure." Allura's mind raced through the implications. If Rowan has been feeding information about new surveillance systems to the same network we disrupted 10 years ago, then the security breach today might have been an attempt to access those systems directly, Harlow finished, or to cover tracks of previous access. The pieces were aligning with alarming clarity. "Admiral, I need to see the current surveillance data from the base. If Rowan modified the systems based on what he was sharing with outside contacts, there might be blind spots or vulnerabilities I can identify." Harlow studied her for a moment, assessing. The analyst she had once been was fully present now, focused and sharp despite 3 years away from the work. "Let's go," he decided. "My vehicle is outside." As they exited the sheriff's office, the coastal air hit Allura's face with bracing clarity. Across the harbor, the naval base stood against the horizon, its security perimeter visible even at this distance. For 3 years, she had avoided looking directly at it, as though the mere act of acknowledging its presence might reveal her past. Now she faced it squarely, her former purpose realigning with her present reality. The drive to the base was tense but efficient, with Admiral Harlow using the time to brief Allura on the inspection protocols and Dr. Rowan's stated purpose for being on site. As a civilian consultant, Rowan had clearance for specific areas, but not the entire facility. His focus was supposedly evaluating the implementation of surveillance algorithms he had helped develop. "The perfect cover for exploiting vulnerabilities," Allura observed. "He knows exactly where to look because he designed the systems." As they approached the main gate, Allura became acutely aware of her appearance, still wearing her waitress uniform from the diner, without proper identification beyond the verbal authority of Admiral Harlow. Yet, as they passed through security checkpoints, she felt herself shifting fully into her former professional identity, the analytical mind that had once earned her commendations and respect. The base security center was a hive of controlled activity when they arrived. Personnel moved with purpose between monitoring stations, voices kept low and professional as they responded to the security breach. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the head of base security, met them at the door. "Admiral," he acknowledged, "we've located Dr. Rowan. He's currently in Lab 3 with the inspection team, apparently unaware of the security alert." "Keep it that way," Harlow instructed. "I want surveillance on him, but no direct confrontation yet. Lieutenant Commander Rayburn will need access to the surveillance system data, particularly anything Dr. Rowan has worked on during this visit or previous consultations." Hayes's eyes shifted to Elora, taking in the incongruous diner uniform with professional neutrality. "Yes, sir. We've set up a secure terminal in the adjacent briefing room." The briefing room was spartanly furnished, a conference table, chairs, and several secure terminals along one wall. Elora moved immediately to the designated computer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for just a moment before muscle memory took over. The familiar rhythm of analysis work flooded back as she navigated through the system architecture. "The core algorithm is definitely Rowan's work," she confirmed after several minutes of examination. "I recognize the basic pattern recognition structure from the Hormuz operation, but there are modifications, subtle ones." "Vulnerabilities?" Harlow asked, standing nearby. "Not exactly," Elora replied, her focus intent on the screen. "More like backdoors. Alternative processing pathways that wouldn't be apparent unless you knew exactly what to look for." Her fingers moved rapidly over the keyboard, tracing the digital breadcrumbs that only someone familiar with Rowan's work would recognize. "He's created a secondary monitoring system within the primary one. It records everything the main system does, but with separate storage and transmission protocols, meaning he could access or transmit surveillance data without triggering security alerts," Harlow concluded grimly. "Precisely." Elora continued working, following the digital trail deeper into the system architecture. "And based on these timestamps, he's been doing exactly that for at least 8 months. Lieutenant Wexler entered the briefing room, his expression tense. "Admiral, Dr. Rowan is on the move. He requested access to the server room for calibration purposes. When denied due to the security alert, he became agitated and is now attempting to leave the base." Harlow's decision was immediate. "Detain him. Full security protocol, but discreet. I don't want this compromising the larger investigation." As Wexler left to relay the orders, Elora made a discovery that caused her to sit back from the terminal in shock. "Admiral," she said quietly, "the data Rowan's been transmitting, it's not just surveillance algorithms, it's personnel files, deployment schedules, security protocols, and specifically, detailed information about your inspection team and itinerary." The implications were clear. The extraction Rook had mentioned wasn't just about removing a compromised asset. It was potentially about targeting high-value naval personnel, including Admiral Harlow himself. "We need to lock down all access points," Harlow said, already moving toward the door. "And I want a full security sweep of any areas Rowan has accessed during this visit." The next hour passed in controlled urgency. Dr. Rowan was taken into custody, initially protesting his innocence before lapsing into tense silence when confronted with evidence of the secondary surveillance system. The base remained on high alert as security teams methodically swept each area, searching for any devices or vulnerabilities Rowan might have introduced. Elora remained at the terminal, diving deeper into the surveillance architecture, identifying each backdoor and security bypass Rowan had created. The work was intense but oddly comforting. The familiar challenge of pattern recognition, of seeing connections others missed. This was what she had been trained for, what she had excelled at, before trauma and bureaucratic abandonment had driven her into hiding. When Admiral Harlow returned to the briefing room, his expression was grim but satisfied. "We've found 3 unauthorized transmission devices in restricted areas. All have been neutralized. Dr. Rowan is being transferred to a secure facility for further questioning." "And the network he was feeding?" Elora asked, not looking up from her work. "That's where your expertise becomes crucial," Harlow replied. "The devices were sophisticated, military grade, but not American manufacture. The transmission protocols are encrypted in a way our standard systems aren't designed to crack." Now, Elora did look up, understanding the implication. "Similar to what we encountered in the Hormuz operation." "Too similar to be coincidental," Harlow confirmed. "The network we disrupted has apparently reconstituted itself with new personnel, but the same basic methodology. And now they have potentially had access to Our latest surveillance capabilities. The gravity of the situation settled between them. What had begun as an intervention in an abusive situation had unveiled a security breach with far-reaching implications for naval operations and personnel safety. "What do you need from me?" Elora asked simply. "Officially, your analysis of the surveillance system vulnerabilities and recommendations for closing them," Harlow said. "Unofficially, your insights into how this network operates based on your previous encounter with them." The request represented more than just temporary assistance. It was an acknowledgement of her value, of the expertise that had been discarded by the system 3 years ago. "I'll need access to the current intelligence on the network's operations," Elora said, already shifting into planning mode, "and the full technical specifications of the surveillance systems Rowan worked on." "You'll have everything you need," Harlow assured her. "But first, there's something else we need to address." He placed a folder on the table between them. Official naval letterhead was visible on the documents inside. "Your discharge papers," Harlow explained. "The official record has been amended to reflect the truth. Post-traumatic stress resulting from classified operations, with honorable discharge and full benefits retroactive to your separation date." Elora stared at the folder, emotions rising unexpectedly in her throat. 3 years of struggling alone, of medical bills she couldn't pay, of nightmares she couldn't explain to anyone. All while the system that had utilized her skills had abandoned her to silence and shame. "Why now?" she asked finally. "After all this time?" "Because silence protects the wrong people," Harlow said simply. "And because someone once taught me that real strength isn't in what we endure alone, it's in what we refuse to let others endure when we have the power to act." The words resonated with unexpected depth. For 3 years, Elora had endured in silence, believing she was protecting others. In reality, her silence had only protected those who had failed her, the system that discarded her, the man who controlled her, the community that looked away. "There's something else," Harlow continued. "The Veterans Affairs Office has established a new program for intelligence personnel dealing with post-traumatic stress from classified operations, specialized treatment with appropriate security protocols. They need someone to develop and oversee it, someone who understands both the operational realities and the personal impact." The offer hung in the air between them, not a return to her former role, but something new, something that acknowledged both her trauma and her expertise. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Elora admitted. "You don't have to decide now," Harlow assured her. "For the moment, we need your help with this current situation. After that, the choice is yours. Return to civilian life, with your record cleared and benefits restored, or consider this new role. Either way, you'll never be invisible again unless you choose to be." The promise carried weight coming from him, an admiral with the authority to ensure the system wouldn't fail her a second time. 1 week later, Elora stood in the memorial garden at the naval base, watching as a small ceremony concluded. The formal recognition of her service had been brief but meaningful, not a grand public affair, but an acknowledgement among those who understood its significance. Admiral Harlow had presented her with a commendation for her work, both in the original Hormuz operation and in uncovering the security breach involving Dr. Rowan. The investigation was ongoing, with Rook Caldwell providing information about his contacts in exchange for consideration in his sentencing. The network that had attempted to extract Dr. Rowan had gone to ground, but with the vulnerabilities in the surveillance systems now identified and closed, their operational capabilities had been significantly compromised. As the small gathering dispersed, Elora remained by the memorial wall, studying the names and dates engraved in stone. So many sacrifices, some acknowledged, others hidden behind the veil of classified operations. Her fingers moved unconsciously to her pocket, where the challenge coin had resided for 3 years. After a moment's hesitation, she removed it, studying its surface one last time. The embossed insignia, the motto etched along the edge, the small nick on one side from when she'd dropped it during the operation. For 3 years, it had been both talisman and burden, a reminder of who she had been and what she had lost. With deliberate motion, she placed it on the small shelf at the base of the memorial wall, alongside other tokens left by those honoring fallen comrades or commemorating significant missions. Not abandoning her past, but acknowledging it as part of a continuum rather than a severing. "Ready?" Admiral Harlow asked, approaching from where he had been speaking with base personnel. Almost, Elora replied. She had exchanged her waitress uniform for civilian clothes. Simple but professional attire, more fitting for her current consulting role. The change was superficial, yet symbolic, another step in reconciling her divided identities. Marlowe's diner won't be the same without you, Harlow observed. Vern's already hired someone new, Elora said with a slight smile, though he says my job is still there if I ever want it back. The simplicity of the offer had touched her deeply when Vern had made it. No questions, no judgment, just acceptance of whatever she chose to be next. The same quiet support he'd offered in his own gruff way during her years of hiding, even when he hadn't fully understood what she was hiding from. Have you decided about the VA program? Harlow asked as they began walking toward the base exit. I'm considering it, Elora admitted. But I think I need some time first, to process everything that's happened, to figure out who I am now that I don't have to be invisible anymore. Harlow nodded understanding. Wherever you land, Lieutenant Commander, the Navy would be fortunate to have your expertise again in any capacity you choose. The use of her rank no longer felt strange. Not a return to her former self exactly, but an acknowledgement of continuity rather than rupture. Elora Rayburn and Elora Reeve were not separate people, but facets of the same complex individual, shaped by trauma and resilience in equal measure. As they reached the main gate, Elora paused, looking back at the base and then across the harbor to Port Haven. The town that had been both prison and sanctuary for 3 years appeared different somehow from this vantage point. Smaller perhaps, but also more nuanced. Not just a place to hide, but a community with its own complexities and contradictions. Sheriff Taylor called this morning, she said. They've found evidence linking Rook to similar exploitation of at least 7 other individuals in town. People with secrets they thought would destroy them if revealed. People who believed they had no choice but to endure his control. And now, Harlow asked, now they're coming forward, telling their stories, finding out they're not alone. Elora turned back to face him. That's what I want to be part of, whether through the VA program or something else, helping people recognize that silence protects the wrong people, and that what feels like shameful isolation is often a shared experience. The insight reflected her own journey, from believing her trauma made her uniquely damaged and therefore vulnerable, to recognizing it as part of a pattern that affected many others. The very analytical skills that had made her valuable in intelligence work now allowed her to see these broader social patterns with clarity. Whatever you decide, you won't be doing it alone this time, Harlow assured her. The promise carried weight, because it came from someone who had demonstrated through actions rather than just words that he understood the cost of abandonment and the value of genuine support. 3 days later, Elora entered Marlowe's diner during the mid-morning lull. The familiar bell chimed above the door, but her perspective had shifted. No longer an employee moving through prescribed routines, but a customer seeing the space through new eyes. Vern looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile. Well, look what the tide brought in. Coffee? Please, Elora replied, taking a seat at the counter. Not her usual spot during breaks, but one that offered a clear view of the entire diner. Old habits of situational awareness remained ingrained. As Vern placed a mug before her, she noticed Dr. Abernathy entering and waved her over. The doctor joined her at the counter, carrying a folder similar to the one Admiral Harlow had presented at the base. The paperwork's all set, Abernathy said without preamble. Veterans Affairs has approved the treatment program funding. They're waiting on your decision about the consulting role. Elora accepted the folder, feeling its weight, not just the physical pages inside, but the commitment they represented. I told them I'd give an answer by the end of the week. And, the doctor prompted. I'm leaning toward yes, Elora admitted. But on my terms, part-time initially, with flexibility to develop the program based on actual needs rather than bureaucratic assumptions. Abernathy smiled. Exactly what I told them you'd say. They've agreed to those conditions, by the way. The bell above the door chimed again as Sheriff Taylor entered, nodding acknowledgement to the women at the counter before taking a seat nearby. Mr. Caldwell's contacts have been identified, she said quietly. Federal agents made arrests in 3 locations this morning. They're still unraveling the network, but it appears to extend into multiple countries. And Rook? Elora asked. Cooperating fully now that he understands the scale of what he was involved in, Taylor replied. He'll face significant charges, but his information is proving valuable in the larger investigation. The conversation paused as Marla, the older waitress, approached with coffee for the sheriff. Her expression toward Alora had changed subtly since the revelations of the previous week. Not quite deference, but a new recognition. Not just the quiet waitress who endured Rook's abuse, but someone with a history and expertise none of them had suspected. "The new girl's working out okay," Marla commented to Vern after serving the sheriff. "Not as fast as Alora, but she's learning." "Nobody's as fast as Alora," Vern replied with gruff affection. Girl could serve the whole diner with one hand tied behind her back. The simple acknowledgement of her competence, even in this context, brought an unexpected warmth to Alora. For 3 years, her perfectionism in the diner had been a displacement of the analytical precision that had defined her naval career, a way to maintain control in a life where she felt she had none. Now, both aspects of her ability were being recognized and valued. As Dr. Abernathy and Sheriff Taylor discussed the community response to Rook's arrest, Elora found herself studying the diner with professional assessment. The flow patterns of servers and customers, the sight lines from different tables, the subtle social dynamics playing out in seating choices and conversation groupings. The same analytical mind that had identified enemy ambush patterns now observed the everyday patterns of community life with equal clarity. The difference was that now the observations didn't overwhelm her, didn't spiral into the paralyzing hypervigilance that had characterized her post-traumatic episodes. The patterns were information, not threat. Interesting rather than overwhelming. "You look different," Vern observed, refilling her coffee. "More like yourself somehow." The comment struck Alora with its simple insight. "I feel more like myself," she acknowledged. "Or maybe a new version of myself, still figuring that out." "Well, whoever you figure out you are, you've always got a place here," Vern said, the gruff affection in his voice unmistakable. "Though I suspect you've got bigger fish to fry now." The offer touched her, not because she intended to return to waitressing, but because it represented unconditional acceptance. Vern had seen her at her most vulnerable, had witnessed her transformation, and still offered belonging without judgment. "I'll still be around," Elora assured him. "This place was home when I needed one." The simple truth of it settled comfortably between them. Port Haven had been both prison and sanctuary during her years of hiding. Now it could simply be community, a place where her past and present could coexist without conflict. As she prepared to leave, Dr. Abernathy handed her one final document. "The VA office in Westport. Your first consultation is scheduled for next week, if you decide to accept the role." Elora took the paper, folding it carefully into her pocket alongside the naval commendation Admiral Harlow had presented. Different aspects of her identity, no longer in opposition, but in conversation with each other. Outside, the coastal air carried the scent of salt and possibility. Across the harbor, the naval base stood not as a reminder of trauma, but as a complex part of her history. Neither idealized nor demonized, but acknowledged for both its failures and its attempts at correction. 3 years ago, she had arrived in Port Haven seeking invisibility, believing her value had been irreparably diminished by trauma and institutional abandonment. Now, she stood in the same physical space, but in an entirely different relationship to it. Visible, connected, purposeful. The patterns that had once overwhelmed her now provided insight. The expertise that had been dismissed now offered a path forward. The silence that had protected the wrong people had been broken, allowing truth and recovery to begin. As Elora walked along the harbor toward her new apartment, a small place with windows facing the water, rather than the shadowed space above the hardware store, she felt the challenge coin's absence from her pocket, not as loss, but as deliberate unburdening, not forgetting, but no longer defined solely by what had been. The future remained uncertain, but uncertainty no longer equated to threat. Whatever came next, she would face it fully present, fully visible, and never again alone. Has someone in your life ever truly seen you when you thought you were invisible? Or have you been the one to notice what others overlooked? Share your story of recognition and the difference it made. If this journey of reclaiming visibility resonates with you, join our community by subscribing. Sometimes, the most profound act of courage is simply allowing yourself to be seen.